And it is a very touching scene, I think, there. Now we go on from there now into the 25th chapter. It says, now Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah, and she bore to him Zimran and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. And Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Ashurim and Letushim and Letushimim and Lishimim. And the sons of Midian were Ephah and Epher and Hanok and Abida and Eldah. These are all the sons of Keturah. Now, in naming these children out, a couple of things we might notice. First of all, the timing or the positioning of the text, if we are assuming some sort of a chronological order, would suggest that Abraham does not marry Keturah until after the death of Sarah. But some of the commentators suggest that this is perhaps not so, that this account here is not intended to be chronological, but simply genealogical. It's simply showing the birth of these other children. We might especially wonder if Abraham is having these children after the death of Sarah, when he was marveling at the fact that Sarah was going to have a child, given that she was old and that he was old. We might wonder about what was his thinking then in having children by Keturah if this is after the death of Sarah. And so that's why part of the thinking, part of the rationale perhaps here is that this is not, that this marriage or this, not, well, that this relationship that he has with Keturah is not after the death of Sarah, but rather before it, and that he has children by this woman. And you can see some of these children that are named of particular significance is in verse 4, or in verse 2, actually. Midian is one of the children that is named. And of course, the Midianites will now go forward from here to play a role with the children of Israel, interacting with the children of Israel for some time. We know, of course, that they also become sort of a nomadic tribe in this area, and will continue to live with within the area of Canaan and the eastern part of the country. It says, now Abraham, verse 5, now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. And this was according to the promise. Here he is. This is confirming Isaac as the heir. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. And so he sends them essentially across the Jordan to the other side. And of course, that's where we find the Midianites living. When the children of Israel come up out of Egypt, we find that there are Midianites living there on that east, what is today Jordan, the country of Jordan. And they, of course, become a problem for the children of Israel. And it says then that, and these are all the years of Abraham's life, in that he lived 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and lived to a ripe old age, an old man, and satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people. And so we have that expression of Abraham's life, an old man satisfied and filled with life, and he's gathered to his people. That idea, the commentators would point out, it does not say he was gathered to his fathers, because his fathers were all buried back over in Mesopotamia. They make this note of the little subtle wording change that Moses uses here in describing this, that he's gathered to his people. And it suggests that the people that he had lived with and had been a part of his household for so many years there in Canaan. We want to point out at this time, and we're going to go back to this, but we'll point out at this time that at this point, the two sons of Isaac that we're going to be reading about in this chapter, the two sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau, are at this time 15 years old. They are 15 years old when their grandfather dies. And then we see here, though, that in verse 9, then his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, facing Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. And they came about after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by Beer Lahai Roi. It's again also interesting to note that here is Ishmael and Isaac together again at the death of their father. Now Isaac, of course, here is at this point a man and an old man. In a lot of ways, he would have been an old man at this point. So is Ishmael. It's interesting that those two have managed to stay in apparently some degree of contact with one another, so that they can get together for their death at the death of their father. It's a measure of the reconciliation that they would have had, and it tells us a little bit, I think, something of even Ishmael's character, that he's willing to return, even though Abraham has sent his mother away, given her her freedom, but sent her away, that nevertheless Ishmael still feels a certain degree of affection and respect for his father, that he will come back and will be there with his brother to help bury his father. We see too that Abraham is buried with Sarah. We might understand that he had probably given instruction that he was to be buried with his wife in that cave, and so they are together again then in the grave that way. We have this little interlude, kind of an interlude passage. This is verses 12 through 18, and gives us something of a genealogy of Ishmael. Says here, now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadad, and Timah, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their camps, 12 princes according to their tribes. If you recall the prophecy that God had given to Hagar, he had told her at the time that Ishmael was going to grow up. He was going to become a father of princes, and that he was going to prosper in that way. Back in a few chapters back, he had promised that to her in chapter, I believe it's in chapter 21. Verse 21 and verse 18, arise, lift up the lad and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. And I think even earlier he promises her that yes, he will be the father of princes. And so here is Moses using this kind of interlude, this little interlude section here, to confirm that prophecy. Here is that prophecy being fulfilled, that Ishmael is in fact the father of these men who go on, in fact, of themselves to be to be princes and heads of tribes. It says, and these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he breathed his last, and he died and was gathered to his people. And they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt, as one goes toward Assyria. He settled in defiance of all his relatives. And so here is that idea of Ishmael, who it says, when it says he settled in defiance of all of his relatives, there is some suggestion there from the commentators that he ended up being, he was a troublemaker. He was something of a troublemaker for the rest of his family, that he and his family became raiders, and that they became nomadics going through this area, and were just generally troublemakers as they roamed around. If we look at the overall genealogies of these peoples, given that there are intermarriages and other migrations of these folks, we can understand that it is likely that Ishmael's descendants, combined with those of Keturah and Lot and Esau, form up the peoples of what is today the modern Arabic nations. That all of those peoples that would count themselves as being of Arab descent are likely descendants from this family line or this family group. And so, in effect, all that conflict that you see over in the Middle East, all of that going on, is really more than anything else a family feud. Yeah, Rita, go ahead. Yes. And yes, and so I think that's exactly, I think, why this section is in chapter 25, to show the fulfillment of that prophecy, that it came about just as God had said. As you pointed out in chapter 16, he's a wild donkey of a man. His hand is going to be against everyone. Everyone's hand is going to be against him. There's going to be animosity between the families, and he's going to live to the east, which we know that he did. And so this is effectively showing us that, yes, that prophecy that God had made back there when he was still even just a boy, that prophecy is fulfilled. We go on from there then. Now it says, now we're going to shift the storyline back to Isaac. It says, now these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled within her, and she said, if it is so, why am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people shall be separated from your body. The one shall be the stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came out forth red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. And afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so he was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. So we can do some quick math here and realize that Rebekah was barren for almost 20 years. Here is Isaac, who was 40 when he took Rebekah to be his wife, and now she's barren for 20 years. So we see that parallel. So there we're going to see a number of parallels between the life of Isaac and the life of his father Abraham. But one of them is that both of them have wives that are barren for a period of time. Here is Rebekah, 20 years waiting for a child. Sarah, of course, waited longer than that for a child, and it took a miracle for her to have a child. But here it is, she's having trouble conceiving children. We see here that apparently the pregnancy was painful. It says in verse 22, the children struggled within her. And it was perhaps in some way, again, painful or uncomfortable or whatever. I have no experience with this. Those of you who have could maybe speak out more about what that might be like. Yes, Regina. Oh, have you? Oh, no kidding. Yes, you can't get away from them. They're always with you. And this was apparently the case with her, that apparently these two were flipping and flailing inside of her. And she's wondering what's going on here. And of course, God reveals to her that unexpected message. Oh, you're having twins. Congratulations. And there are two nations there, and delivers this prophecy to her. That we might speculate whether she actually reveals this prophecy to Isaac or not. Isaac seems to be ignorant of this prophecy, but she's aware of it. And so I find that kind of interesting too, the possibility that she had received this message from God, but did not share it with her husband Isaac. The boys come out, they are born, and the names Esau literally means hairy. He comes out, it says red all over like a garment, like a hairy garment. He must have been kind of a odd looking, perhaps even an ugly looking baby, all covered with hair. And they give him that name of Esau in recognition of this condition that he's got. And then Jacob comes out, grabbing a hold, as it says, of his brother's heel. And the name Jacob means literally heel catcher or heel grabber, and it is interpreted to mean supplanter. The idea there is it carries connotations. The name actually carries connotations to wrestling, to a wrestling hold. Where he is trying to, as if he is trying to flip his brother or get some advantage, leverage over his brother by grabbing hold of his heel. And so they kind of give these children what almost seems like whimsical names, but they end up being very, very realistic in terms of their ultimate behavior. We notice Paul uses the example of the birth of these boys over in Romans, the 9th chapter. Paul will actually refer to this on at least two occasions. The episode here in this chapter, he will refer to it at least twice, once in the book of Romans and once in the book of Hebrews. And we'll be looking at both of those. And we look and see what Paul wrote about this over in Romans, the 9th chapter, starting in verse 10. He says, and not only this, but there was Rebekah also, who, when she had conceived twins by one man, our father Isaac, for though the twins were not yet born and had not done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose, according to his choice, might stand, not because of works, but because of him who calls. It was said to her, the older will serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. That reference there of Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated, out of verse 13, is a reference back to Malachi 1 and verse 2. And it is talking not necessarily even about the boys, but about the nations that would come from them. Of God saying, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. It was a reference to those nations. A lot of doctrine comes out of this particular passage, by the way, trying to demonstrate the doctrine of the Calvinistic doctrine of predestination. And they'll want to try and suggest that yes, of course, God predestines because God sets certain ones to be saved and certain ones to not be to be lost, just as he assigned conditions to Jacob and Esau. Well, notice though in this passage, we're not talking about salvation at all in this text. We're talking about the continuation of the promise that God had given to Abraham, a physical condition in this life of which one was going to carry forward the promise, which one was going to carry forward that heir, being the heir of Abraham and being the heir of Isaac, and which one was going to go forward with that promise. And it had nothing to do with salvation. It simply has to do with God making a choice as to which one was going to do what, according to the ongoing track of this life. And so trying to extend this onto predestination of God sending people to hell or God sending people to heaven, preordained, that this text does not support that. This text has nothing to do with that. It is entirely on the nature of God giving physical blessings to people. And some people he does give certain physical blessings to, and some people he doesn't. And we don't always understand the why. Why are some men given to be billionaires and I'm not? Well, that God decided that's the way it was going to be. Question or comment on this so far? We continue on then. Then this next section, this is a key story. Now you really have to grasp this. This is really a key exchange here because it will establish a great deal of what goes forward with the Old Testament. It really does establish a great deal of what goes forward with the Old Testament and with the entire lineage of leading up to Jesus, leading up to the Messiah. And it is interesting to me how such a monumental thing hinges on such a small outcome or small event, a very small event here, and yet look at the tremendous impact that small event has on the history of God's people. Verse 27. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die, so what use then is the birthright to me?" Jacob said, "First swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and he rose and went on his way, and thus Esau despised his birthright. Again, we see this is such a small thing, such a small episode, and yet it has such profound consequences that we give it. And this is really worthy of a more lengthy study, and I've given it some fair amount of attention in the next several slides. We start off, we see how these two boys grow up, and they are very opposite in their nature. They are very different in their nature. Esau is a hunter. He's an outdoorsman. We'd call him a rugged guy. We'd probably look at this guy, oh, what a rugged outdoorsman. And he's out in the field and he's out hunting, and he's that man's man that we tend to admire in our literature and in our entertainment. While Jacob is more of a homebody. He's kind of a quiet guy, staying at home. Might even call him, I don't know, maybe something of a nerd, staying at home, staying around the tents and just kind of hanging out in the house. He's kind of a homebody and doesn't go out very much. And we see the very different nature of these two boys. Esau comes in, and Jacob has prepared this stew. Now, the word stew here is literally means littles. It was kind of a pea soup or a pea stew, kind of a dish. If you've ever had lentils, you know, at least to me, they taste like peas or beans, kind of a bean soup. Nourishing and pretty good, but nothing to get terribly excited about usually. And some of the commentators note that as Jacob here makes this bargain with him, he says, in verse 31, first sell me your birthright. The fact that Jacob kind of pounces on this weakness, this momentary weakness of Esau, suggests that Esau has thought, or Jacob rather, has thought about this for some time. Jacob has been kind of, again, we would suggest that perhaps Jacob, being his mother's favorite, he knows about what the prophecy that God had given to his mother, whereas Esau and Isaac are perhaps ignorant of it. But Jacob knows, or at least it's suggested that he knows. Certainly Rebekah knows. And she has put this idea in his head, and he has been kind of watching for an opportunity. It suggests, too, that Jacob is well aware of his brother's nature. He's well aware that his brother is kind of a thoughtless kind of fellow, perhaps, in some sense. And he's just been waiting and watching for this opportunity, and now here it comes. Esau then, as a result of this, he becomes this very tragic figure in the Bible. He literally snatches defeat from the jaws of victory. He's in the perfect spot. He's in the perfect spot. He's the firstborn. He's the firstborn of this family, in a very religious family, very religious, God-fearing. We see this back in chapter 19 and verse 25, that I think that's the wrong, I've written down the wrong passage. But we know this is a family that worships God. Here is Abraham worshiping God. Here's Isaac worshiping God. And we find this very religious family. He has notable skills. Verse 27 says he is a skillful hunter. He's not merely a hunter, he's a skillful hunter and able to go out and find game that his father loves. He's loved by his father because of that. He's this, like I said, he's this man's man. He's this outdoors guy. I kind of picture this brawny kind of rugged individual who's outside a lot, and he goes hunting, and he's just very masculine. In all his regards, he's very masculine, loved by his father. His father loves him. And so he is in a great position. He's in a fantastic position. He's in a lot of ways, he is a good man, actually. We see a lot of good in him. We find that he seeks to please his father. If we look forward a little bit, we'll find out in chapter 27, if we read there, it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see. He called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he said to him, "Here I am." And Isaac said, "Behold, now I am old and do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and will bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." And so Isaac obeys. Isaac goes out and says, "Yes, I'm on my way." He takes off and grabs up his gear, and he goes out to do that. We find out that he wanted his father's blessing. Over again, chapter 27, starting in verse 32 there, we find It says, Isaac, his father, said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." And Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me so that I ate of it before you came?" And blessed him. "Yes, and he shall be blessed." When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father." And he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing." Then he said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. And he took away my birthright, and behold, he has taken away my blessing." So you see here, Esau wanted the blessing. He wanted the blessing of his father. He wanted to receive that respect and acknowledgement from his father. We find that even though his brother Jacob has supplanted him, we ultimately see in chapter 33, if we read verses 1 through 11, we find that he actually ultimately forgives Jacob. Even this I don't know what you call it, theft exactly, but this trick, this deception, he ultimately even forgives him. Over in chapter 3 and verse 1, then Jacob lifted up his eyes, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 maids. And he put the maids and the children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw the women and the children. He said, "Who are these with you?" So he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids came near with their children, and they bowed down. And Leah likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterward Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean, all this company which I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own." And Jacob said, "No, please, if I found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand, for I see in your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably." See, here's Esau even willing to forgive him of this terrible deception, this ruinous deception, and yet Esau's willing to forgive him. So there's a lot there that we can see. He joins in with Jacob, and he joins with him as they together bury their father. Over in chapter 35 and verse 29, it says, verse 28, "Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him." And so he joins with his brother in giving that honor to his father, giving that last honor to his father of helping to bury his father. And so we see in a lot of ways Esau was a good man. He was a decent fellow. We would not expect to have some negative view of him, given what we see of the story. And yet Paul in the book of Hebrews describes him as a profane person and uses him as an example of one who's defiled. If we read over in Hebrews 12, verses 14 and 17, it says, Paul there giving instruction says, "Follow peace with all and holiness, without which no one shall see the Lord, looking diligently lest any fail of the grace of God, or lest any root of bitterness springing up disturb you, and by it many are defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he did not find any place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears." And here is Paul describing Esau as a profane person. He is a profane man. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, the Vine's dictionary defines this word profane as babelos, is the word in the Greek. It means the natural antagonism between the profane and the holy, or divine that grew into a moral antagonism. And so accordingly, Babelos is that which lacks all relationship or affinity to God. So here is Esau being described as a man who has no relationship with God, no affinity for God, no consciousness of God, if you will. And so we see here him being described in these very stark terms. Why is he characterized this way? Why is he called out in this way? Well, here's the problem. Esau here was a man who was placing his own desires ahead of the will of God. He places his own desires. If we turn back to the account in Genesis, we notice in verse 30, for example, he says, well, look, I need to swallow that red stuff because I'm famished. I'm famished. And so he allows the circumstances, he allows his own physical condition, he allows it to drive his entire thought process. He doesn't think about consequences. He doesn't think about what he's really doing. It's just, hey, I'm hungry. I want food now. He exaggerates the severity of the condition. Verse 32, he says, behold, I'm about to die. Of what use then is a birthright to me? He thinks, oh, I'm hungry. I must be dying. It's an exaggeration. It's a gross exaggeration of his condition. He's not starving to death. He's not yet reached that condition. He's maybe really hungry, okay, but he hasn't been gone long enough that he's, starving to death. And he was casual about the promises and the oaths that he made. He says he swears to Jacob. He swears, and he swore to him, and he sells his birthright. Then Esau gave him the bread and the stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. He doesn't stop to consider what he's just done. He doesn't think it over. He doesn't discuss it. It's like, no problem. Sure, you want the birthright? It's yours. Give me the stew. Give me the food. And as the Bible says, he despised his birthright. Well, what do we mean by that? What was the birthright? What was it that he was actually despising? As the firstborn, Esau could expect to receive the inheritance of the eldest son. He would have received a double portion of the wealth. That's codified in the Mosaic law in Deuteronomy 21 and verse 17. But we might understand that even at this time, the eldest son received the greatest portion of the inheritance. We saw that Isaac had received all that Abraham had. When Abraham died, we might understand that in the same way, Esau might have expected to receive all that Isaac had, with perhaps some smaller portion, considerably smaller portion, going to Jacob. We see that he would have had the rule and the authority over his family, because in chapter 27, the next chapter, chapter 27, verse 29, when Isaac gives the blessing to Jacob, he says, now may people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed are those who curse you, and blessed are those who bless you. He becomes the ruler of the family. He becomes the head of the family. And Esau was in line for that. Esau, that was his birthright. He would have been the ruler of the family. He would have been the leader of all of this. He would have also been recipient of the blessing of that threefold promise that had been given first to his grandfather Abraham back in Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. We see that in Genesis, if we look at that promise given to Abraham, says, go forth from your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land where I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That was a promise given to Abraham. That was the same promise given to Isaac. We see over in Isaac chapter 26, or in Genesis rather, 26, 1 to 5, that In verse 3, God speaking to Isaac, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, to you and to your descendants. I will give these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham, and I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and you will give your descendants all the lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And so this was the promise. This was the promise that was given first to his grandfather, then to his father. And Esau stood in line to get it next. And he basically says, I'm not interested. I don't care. I don't, this is no big deal. This has no meaning to me. What? Yeah. Yes. That's correct. Right. Yeah. Yeah, if we get down even to the end of there's a willfulness about him. There is a willful arrogance about him. If you look at the end of chapter 26, for example, where Rita was referencing the end of chapter 28, where these women are mentioned again, but we see what happened at the end of chapter 26. It says, now when Esau was 40, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basmath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they brought grief to Isaac and to Rebekah. Notice that they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. This was not what Isaac and Rebekah wanted, and these women become a pain in the neck, apparently. And there is some thought that perhaps Esau says, I don't care, that's your problem. All right. Rather than try and delve into this slide, I'm out of time. I'm going to stop here. We're going to finish this up next week. We're going to talk about, what did Esau did, should he have understood? And we will continue to consider the failing of Esau. And again, remember the momentous outcome of this relatively small, seemingly small episode. Thank you for your attention today.